everybody. Today I am here and I am talking about how to decorate your home in the vintage style. As you can see, I obviously do. So I'm going to give you a couple of tips and tricks that I have picked up along the way in my own progression of making my home into a more vintage styled home. So hopefully you guys can pick up a few pointers along the way, and without further ado, let's do this. A really good place to start is if you have a certain theme that you want to follow. My sort of feel in my house is just kind of atomic era 50s. I have friends that will do more Asian inspired, so more like 30s and 40s, that kind of thing. I have friends that love to do the 40s style tiki thing. I have friends that love the sort of 50s western, spaghetti westerns type of style. So if you are into a theme, really have that in mind when you start buying things, because if you start to buy piece, and then you realize at the end that you want to go with a theme, then you have all these pieces that might not fit with the theme. That's not to say that you can't do themes room by room, but definitely kind of have a game plan before you start buying things, because the worst is when you have incredible pieces that just kind of don't fit your style or the theme that you're going for in a room. So one of the first things I do is scour thrift stores and antique malls. Now it's a little bit more difficult now that I live in Southern California because things tend to be a little bit more rare and also way more expensive. So definitely when I'm on tour, I go to local antique stores in the smallest cities I can find because they tend to still have really good stuff and it's pretty affordable. I am really weird. I don't know why I do it, but I tend to buy things in twos and then I mount them off center on my walls. If you look around my living room, you will see two, and all off center. I don't know why I do it, but it tends to just have a more vintage feel to me. Another great place to find vintage things is Etsy. I found these shadow boxes at Etsy. These little sticker decals on my walls I found on Etsy. There's a lot of people that are making sort of vintage reproduction things that tend to be a little bit more affordable and also more durable. When you do find vintage things like this shadow box that I have, they tend to be a little bit more fragile, so you have to be more careful with them, and also they're kind of one-of-a-kind things, so if they do break, it's more heartbreaking than if you just, drop a shadow box off your wall and then go back on Etsy and buy it again. Another thing you can do too is, like, this mirror right here is actually just a modern mirror, but I gave it to my friend Scratch and he painted it. So I don't know if you can see the detail, but he painted it in pink metal flake and then painted some atomic starbursts on it. Or like my bookshelf that I made in one of my videos, you can make newer things look old just by the way that you paint them and then the things that you put on them. Now as far as furniture goes, my couch is actually a modern couch, but it is a sectional, so it has a vintage feel. I tend to like modern couches over vintage couches because once the material inside of a vintage couch ages, it starts to be really uncomfortable. It starts to break down. The springs will start to come through. And I like a nice comfy couch that I can lay on and watch TV and lounge on and read on. So I am more of a modern couch girl. That being said, I like to surround my modern couch with vintage furniture, and then that makes it feel a little bit more vintage. Like I said, look wherever you can. Craigslist is another really great place, especially for furniture. Usually if you use keywords like vintage, mid-century, retro, Mad Men, if you're going for the more 60s look, if you use those kind of keywords mixed with furniture or mixed with couch, sideboard, hutch, end tables, coffee table, whatever it is that you're looking for, then you can find usually those things in the right era. I'm also a fan of collecting ashtrays, vintage ashtrays, and most of you hopefully don't smoke, and those that do hopefully don't smoke in your house. So the thing I love for my vintage ashtrays is to put candy in them. I use my vintage ashtrays as candy dishes, which is kind of a win-win because the candy looks really cute, and also when my friends come over, they love it because there's always candy for them to sort of munch on. Another thing I love to collect is vintage atomic era china. I also collect head vases. People ask me all the time when they see pictures of these girls what they are, what they're called. They are called head vases. They are actually vases. The top of them are hollow. I don't actually use them as vases because I don't want to ruin them by putting water and flowers and fertilizer or whatever it is inside of them. So I just put them on display, and they're pretty much on display all over my house. I do have kind of one central place where my favorites are, and then I kind of have my other ones scattered all over the house. Another great way to sort of vintage up a house is to buy vintage or vintage reproduction curtains. Now when you're searching for these on eBay or online or wherever, you're gonna wanna look for bark cloth or fiberglass. These are the two sort of most well-known types of curtains. One thing I like to do is, because they're harder to find and it's hard to find enough panels to cover like an entire window, what I do is I do curtains on either side of the window and then white panels in the center. You can buy the white panels at IKEA, they're like $12. They're super long, you can tailor them to whatever height your windows are, and then they will kind of fit with the curtains that you have. One thing I can suggest for your kitchen, I do have some vintage pieces in my kitchen. I have some vintage serving trays, I have vintage sort of flour, sugar, tea, coffee holders, canisters to put on the counter. I like to use my vintage stuff more as display and less for practical use. My serving trays I actually do use when I have people over and when I entertain and stuff. My canisters I do use for sugar and flour, but I keep them in the original packaging and then put them inside so the actual flour and sugar isn't touching the materials. But if you find a piece and you're not sure exactly what it is, I would say be wary of actually using it or washing it, especially if you're putting it in the dishwasher, because they're gonna be fragile. They didn't have dishwashers back then, so they might actually break. Be really, really careful if you buy old appliances or old lamps, because the wiring in them sometimes has broken down or corroded, or it just isn't as up to standards like ours are now. So I would suggest, if you do get any sort of vintage electrical apparatus, whatever it might be, that maybe you take it to an electrician and just make sure that it is good, because the last thing you want is to burn your house down because you bought a super awesome vintage lamp and it's shorted out on you. Another thing you can do is use area rugs to kind of create color and break up space. I have a big turquoise area rug in my living room. I have runners all over the house that have sort of, you know, atomic patterns or block patterns or whatever it is, and they sort of add a little bit of fun to the area. Another thing you can do is get light switch outlets or power outlet covers, and those you can find on Etsy, eBay, Amazon. If you just search, you know, mid-century, vintage, atomic, whatever style you're looking for, and light switch covers, and those also really kind of spice up a room. Another thing that I did in my house was paint the walls, and this is something that's really easy, especially if you, like me, have interesting panels in your walls. So the base color that the house already was sort of an off-white color. Then I took a light seafoam color and then a dark seafoam color as sort of the accent. And I painted each opposite wall. So this wall right here and that wall that you see in the mirror are opposite sides, so I painted those both with the light seafoam color. Then in the dining room, I took the insides of the panels, I painted them the dark seafoam color, and then above the crown molding, I painted the light color. So you can do a lot with painting. So you don't have to spend a ton of money to have a vintage style house. You can just buy it piece by piece. I've been collecting for probably 15 years now, probably more than that. So be patient. It's probably gonna take you a little bit of time to find pieces, to refurbish pieces, to do the things that you need to do. But don't be discouraged by people that have immaculate mid-century houses. It didn't all happen in a night, and also sometimes you are on more of a budget. So hopefully this helped you. Hopefully you found some tips and tricks. And if any of you guys have other tips and tricks to share with each other, especially when it maybe comes to like renovating or things like that I haven't actually done, please leave them in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you on the next one.